episode is brought to you by Premensal.
If I was to say, okay, top priority in managing all of the symptoms that we've talked about, panic attacks, dizziness, heart palpitations, it's basically look at your stress management strategies. And the thing that shines there without question is meditation.
Welcome back to Season 14 of Thriving in Menopause, brought to you by Prevention Magazine. I'm Zoe Mernier, the editor of Prevention, and today we're diving into a topic that can be quite scary for women when they start happening, those unsettling symptoms of heart palpitations, dizziness, and even panic attacks. If you've ever felt your heart suddenly race, the room spin, or a wave of anxiety wash over you out of nowhere, you'll know how scary it can be. These symptoms are surprisingly common in midlife, but they're often not talked about, which can make them feel even more isolating. To help us understand why they happen, how they're connected, and most importantly, what can be done to ease them, I'm joined by Dr. Coates. Dr. Coates is an integrative medical doctor who works closely with women navigating menopause and perimenopause, and she's here to break down the science in a way that feels empowering and practical. Dr. Coates, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Zoe. It's a pleasure to be talking about one of my favourite topics.
Absolutely. So a lot of women in midlife report heart palpitations, dizziness, and even panic attacks. So can you start by explaining why these symptoms are so common during the menopausal transition?
It's very easy to see why this happens, and more so in some women than others, by basically looking at the effect that estrogen and progesterone, our two fertility hormones, their impact on blood vessel health. And when we're wandering through our 30s and 40s and we have plenty of estrogen and progesterone hormones floating around, estrogen normally steadies and calms blood vessels, and it also reduces stress hormones like adrenaline, so it mitigates the effect of those other support hormones on the blood vessels. Progesterone, the other fertility hormone that we enjoy, particularly in the second half of our cycle, it acts a little bit like your body's natural tranquilizer. It actually gives a layer of calm that can help women, certainly during their fertile phase. But when it declines as a natural part of perimenopause, it actually removes that layer of calm and makes women more prone to anxiety and palpitations.
Right. So are those symptoms interconnected? The palpitations and the anxiety, are they interconnected, or can they arise independently?
Again, they are interconnected and quite intimately so. Certainly, your heart palpitations can be a stress in their own right. And once you start feeling out of control of your body, then the stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol begin to rise. This can, in turn, dip into a panic attack, which is basically unremitting adrenaline that has nowhere to go and no purpose. And the dizziness that you might see in some women can also be related to the hormonal shifts that change our reactivity to adrenaline. So for some women, they appear separately. For others, they tend to feed off one another in a loop. So you can start off with palpitations that can then feed the adrenaline pathway, but you can also have changes in your cardiovascular system as a result of adrenaline bathing your system in anxiety and feeling quite stressed.
Right. So obviously a lot of this is then down to hormonal fluctuations, as you've said. Are they ever also down to lifestyle or underlying health issues?
Absolutely. And I suppose if you look at it, the changes that happen at menopause for women set the stage, but how significant those symptoms will become really does depend on lifestyle choices. And a little bit of genetics thrown in there too. So we've got a lot of moving parts when we look at why some women will get heart palpitations and heart flutters, and other women will just breeze through without that particular symptom of menopause. One of the really important differentiations to make is the difference between those heart flutters that come and go and are quite insignificant medically. And there is another subcategory of heart palpitations that fall into a more medically serious component. And that's a particular medical arrhythmia called atrial fibrillation. So the bottom line is that if women have regular and significant runs of heart irregularities, it's important to check in with your doctor and perhaps get them to organise an ECG, a heart tracing for you, so that we can actually reassure you that it's part of that insignificant adrenaline-driven fluctuation in palpitations rather than a more medically significant label of atrial fibrillation. And both of them can occur because of the changes that happen at menopause with regard to progesterone dropping down.
So I guess there's no real way to distinguish for a woman between what might be, a harmless menopause-induced palpitation and something that is more serious.
Yeah, and I think basically when we look at, I suppose, so-called normal menopausal palpitations, they're often brief and they feel more like a little flutter, and they're sometimes directly linked with hot flushes, stress, or at bedtime when you're trying to sleep and get that restorative sleep under your belt. Definitely the red flags are if it's associated with any chest pain or discomfort, any tightness around the chest, or any pain that radiates up to the jaw or down the arm. If you are feeling like you're about to faint, or if you do faint, or palpitations and flutters that don't settle. And I think if in doubt, always seek medical review just to reassure yourself that this is part of the normal menopausal transition rather than an unveiling of something more significant with your heart health.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of people clicked when Oprah Winfrey talked about her experience with heart palpitations during menopause, because I think it's not something that is commonly discussed as a menopausal symptom as much as your hot flushes. Is it a lot rarer, or how typical is it?
I would say it's probably an uncommon thing. Or certainly heart flutters would be quite a common thing. They're transient, and sometimes they come and go so quickly that women realise that they're just part of the hot flush or the other symptoms, rather than something that they focus on and lasts for minutes or hours. The other thing too is when they happen, and often they will be worse at night, and that's when the progesterone levels, particularly in the early perimenopause transition, progesterone levels are lower and adrenaline levels are higher. So those two double whammies will actually make it more obvious at night. And I think when you're trying to get a good quality sleep, you're more focused inward as well. You haven't got those distractions of day-to-day life, and you tend to be more in tune with what's happening with your body. So that will make it probably more obvious at night than it would be in a busy day that most women are having.
That's right, absolutely. So what treatment or management approaches are most effective for palpitations?
If we're looking at the easy things that you can action straight away, certainly looking at your stress mitigation strategies. And by that I mean mindfulness work, meditation, breath work, and yoga during the day to actually help you regulate your stress hormones down in preparation for a more peaceful and quality sleep. So those sort of breathwork stress mitigation strategies would be the first thing that I'd say is going to be a woman's best friend moving through that menopause transition. The other thing to be mindful of is the play of some nutrients like magnesium in settling the irritability of your blood vessels around. Magnesium directly impacts the smooth muscle that surrounds our blood vessels, and it relaxes it. So it's got a direct influence on whether or not the muscles that dictate whether you'll hot flush or not are actually at play. So some women find that, and particularly at night, a good dose of magnesium will be a good sleep support, and it will reduce the hot flushes, for example. We also know that magnesium has a heart health and an electrical activity on the heart muscle. So it can help also with the heart flutters, and is also a good thing for women who have been diagnosed medically with the atrial fibrillation that comes with menopause. It's important to stay hydrated because that's going to help the blood vessels behave themselves. And that includes blood vessels that then will hot flush and trigger the heart palpitations. So it's a little bit like a domino effect happening at night. And cutting down on stimulants like caffeine and alcohol will make a huge difference because they can hop on the adrenaline receptors in our brain and behave like adrenaline, pushing the heart to beat a little bit faster and give you that fluttering feeling. So your caffeine and your alcohol regulation is important. And may I say, if a woman in menopause has an alcoholic drink, be prepared to flush that night.
Yes, it will come back to bite us, won't it?
Absolutely.
Sadly. Now, when you talk about the breath work, can you use breath work when that feeling is actually happening? Will that sort of help calm you then and there?
Yes, it absolutely will. And it's probably worthwhile either getting an instruction on how to apply breath strategy or get somebody to show you how to do it. So you have to learn the technique before you can actually apply it in the middle of that hot flush palpitation run. And it basically involves slowing your breath down and basically trying to, instead of breathing somewhere around 12 to 18 breaths per minute, to try and slow it down to about 10 breaths per minute by basically consciously breathing slower, holding at your expiration and then taking a slow breath in and then holding that breath in at the peak before you slowly breathe out. And that has a direct effect on what we call the vagus nerve, which basically controls heart regulation. So we know why breath work works with regard to those runs and palpitations and faster heartbeat. And it's a really handy tool to use because if women can control their breath and then control their symptoms directly, it really relieves some of the anxiety that you might have about what's causing it.
For sure. Okay, let's move on to dizziness. So what are the main reasons women might feel lightheaded or off balance during this stage of life? I guess they're all connected.
They are, and it is. It's absolutely a domino effect. When you have that symptom of dizziness in menopause, certainly your heart beating irregularly or very fast can actually create a symptom of dizziness. So they are intimately related. But when estrogen fluctuates, it can actually cause dips and rises in blood pressure, and that reduces the blood flow to the brain momentarily, and then other factors kick in to actually support blood pressure regulation. But dizziness, again, is a very common problem in menopause. And what we find is if women are dehydrated, it's going to be worse because there's less blood and fluid in that system, that cardiovascular system, to keep the head of pressure up to support your brain. And progesterone actually can add to the anxiety, which then again dominoes into the stress hormone reactivity that can cause some people dizziness and a low blood pressure during that part of the menopause transition. It's also really, really important to manage blood sugar swings. So having a high sugar hit at bedtime can be a disaster because you can then add low blood sugar and high peaks to that feeling of dizziness that happens because of blood regulation due to cardiovascular and blood pressure changes. So blood sugar changes plus blood pressure changes are going to make those feelings of dizziness much worse.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of women say they feel dizzy when they stand up quickly, or others say, it's in the middle of a hot flush. So what's at play with some of those triggers?
Yeah. If you get dizzy when you stand up quickly, it's almost certainly low blood pressure. And the first thing to do is to make sure you're hydrated. Have you drunk your 2 to 3 glasses of water that day? If it's a really hot season, then you need to drink more. And if you're flushing and drenching through the bed sheets, you're losing water and you need to replace that water. So first thing to do is to stay hydrated. Also, to keep yourself safe if you're getting up in the middle of the night. Make sure you've got your sea legs before you actually stand and take that first step, because your blood pressure might take those few seconds to actually regulate before you actually get up and move. And that can be a problem with women feeling either dizzy and falling or fainting because they haven't waited for the blood pressure to regulate before they've actually headed off to the loo in the middle of the night. So that's important. We know that indirectly, gentle movement will improve these things. So getting some good movement activity through, whether it be walking, HIIT training where you do your huff and puff exercise for 5 or 10 minutes a day, those activities change the way your blood vessels regulate your blood pressure in a very positive way. So certainly gentle movement. And again, breath work, meditation to reduce the adrenaline-driven dizziness that can make all of these symptoms worse.
Sure.
There's a couple of really useful herbs too, and I've used them in my practice and they've worked a treat. I would advise any women who are looking at a natural alternative to medication and a herbal support for the symptoms of dizziness to check in with an experienced naturopath, because there are some contraindications to all herbs in the same way as there would be with mainstream medical drugs. But ashwagandha, and its other name in Western herbal medicine is withania, can make a very big difference to blood pressure regulation and also to stress management. And withania is probably the only herb that I've seen really good medical research on its ability to actually reduce cortisol levels in women. And that basically means that the stress hormone pathways are less reactive as well. The other really good herbal to consider is rhodiola. And again, these adaptogenic herbs will help regulate blood pressure, whether it's too high or too low. It tends to bring it back to the middle ground and help your body find a nice middle ground. If you are replete and have plenty of magnesium on board, again, these herbs will work better than if you're severely or significantly magnesium deficient.
Yes, absolutely. And likewise, when should dizziness be checked out by a doctor? Because I know that there are also obviously certain conditions that can cause this, and some which are, I guess, more prevalent in midlife as well.
Yes, and I think that the main thing with dizziness is if you're a falls risk, so if you're older and you have perhaps a problem with low bone density, you can't afford a fall because that might create a bone fracture. So you look at those underlying, I suppose, risk factors of what happens when you're dizzy. So if you are prone to falling, I think it's important to engage the help of a medical doctor to monitor your blood pressure and to provide support for that. And that may also be pulling back on blood pressure medication at this time as well. So it's important to stay in touch with your local doctor with regard to blood pressure regulation. But if you lose consciousness, if you faint, then you need to have that checked out, because it might not be pure and simple your blood pressure dropping. It could also be related to a less common arrhythmia or heart irregularity in beating that needs to be checked medically. So if in doubt, have it checked, have your heart health checked, and then you know that all of these more natural and easy to implement strategies are going to be safe and readily usable when you're at home in the middle of the night when it all is happening.
Yes, absolutely. In the dark. Yes.
Exactly right.
So, well, let's now move on to the big kahuna of the panic attacks, which of course can be incredibly frightening to go through,
Yes.
especially if you don't know what it is. So I guess just touch again on what role fluctuating hormones play in triggering those during menopause.
I think if we look at, again, the role of estrogen and progesterone and what they do in younger women, progesterone particularly is an underrated hormone. Progesterone works its magic to support the first 12 weeks of a pregnancy. But as we move into menopause, it's a hormone that provides a mood stability and an antidepressant effect. So having adequate, even though it's going to be much lower than when you were cycling and fertile, having an adequate amount of baseline progesterone will help to put a wet blanket on those stress hormone pathways, and it will help to mitigate the adrenaline-driven tendency to those panic attacks. There's a couple of other what I call support hormones that are really not appreciated in menopause, and they deserve more press. And they are the mood hormones, the brain hormones called GABA, GABA-aminobenzoic acid, GABA, and serotonin. And GABA and serotonin are basically your natural calmers. And you could think of GABA as the hormone that you produce that is akin to taking a dose of Valium. It's one of those hormones that we know in women are basically soothe an overreactive nervous system and can make a difference to our threshold for going into those panic attacks and feeling quite anxious at any time of the day and night. The support for GABA and serotonin is really important because they can be, again, your natural best friend hormones as you're moving through menopause, trying to navigate the ebbs and flows without landing in the emergency centre in the middle of the night, worried about the symptoms that you're having.
So how do we support these, the GABA and the serotonin?
Right. Oh, good question, Zoe. Certainly, it's interesting. The serotonin, although it's a brain support hormone, 94% of it is made in the gut wall. And a lot of people don't realize that. So anything that affects your gut, the health of your gut wall, is going to interfere with the factory of happiness that produces your serotonin. So that's an important factor. So number one, and this goes for other symptoms of menopause, make sure that your gut is in the best health that it possibly can to support you through that menopausal transition. The other thing is that serotonin needs a backbone from protein-based foods. So things like your turkey, your chicken, your fish, those white meats, then are used, the protein amino acids in those protein foods are used to build serotonin. So you need to actually be nourishing your body with the building blocks in order for the factory of happiness in the gut to have the raw ingredients to provide that support. And the other thing that a lot of people don't know is that the production of serotonin is at its peak in the deep sleep cycle of your nightly sleep. And again, menopausal women who are not sleeping well are putting that production pathway at risk of not providing enough serotonin, which means that they wake up feeling a little bit meh rather than feeling, happy and happy to start the day. So nurturing your serotonin production lines and your gut health goes a long way with that. With GABA, we have the advantage of being able to make from our own protein stores the backbone for the GABA. So it helps to basically get that pathway underway. We need to make that a little bit more during the day for use at night. And basically that's the hormone that allows us to go to sleep. So GABA and melatonin, our sleep hormone, work together. They're partners that will actually help us go into and move through a restorative sleep. And if we do that well, we produce lots of serotonin, and we then wake up the next day with a less likelihood of hormonal imbalances due to the stress of not sleeping. So, as I say, there's a lot of moving parts.
Absolutely. It's all very interwoven, isn't it?
Exactly. So you've got to break it down into, and if I was to say, okay, top priority in managing all of the symptoms that we've talked about, panic attacks, dizziness, and heart palpitations, it's basically look at your stress management strategies and to make sure that you've got really good strategies to actually mitigate the stress. And the thing that shines there without question is meditation. And there is so much new information out about the benefits of meditation, even 5 or 10 minutes of it a day in mitigating not only the dizziness, the panic attacks and the other symptoms that we're talking about today, but making that transition through menopause so much easier for women. That's my number one priority when I'm looking at advising a woman on how she navigates this particular change as easily as possible. The second thing is gut health, and that has a role to play in mitigating the hormonal hurdles of menopause, I suppose. It supports your breasts, it supports your ovaries to do the right thing, and it will allow you to live a longer and healthier life if your gut is doing what guts are supposed to do. And you've got to put the right ingredients into your body. So missing meals, skipping meals, relying on quick sugar fixes is a recipe for a disastrous transition through menopause. It will make dizziness, heart palpitations and panic attacks worse because of the direct effect on the adrenaline stress hormone that causes and the cortisol that it produces as a problem with nutrient deficiency, because you're eating food that's calorie deficient, and that's replacing food that works to support your hormonal wellness and balance.
Yes, absolutely. So let's just say that, despite our best efforts, we have managed to have a panic attack. What are some strategies that women could use within the moment when that's happening?
I think if you look at the beast adrenaline, what it's doing is it's telling a person that their life's in danger and they better get back to that cave. So adrenaline dictates that we need to move and to move quickly. And one of the best strategies that women can use in the middle of night or in the middle of a boardroom meeting is to basically take time out. And if it's in the middle of a boardroom meeting, go to the toilet, lock the door, and basically air bash. Men would call it shadow boxing, but bash very, very quickly into the air with your arms until you feel a little bit of huff and puff, 2 minutes by the clock. And the very process of moving your body will dissipate adrenaline. It will take adrenaline out of your body. And that then starts to relax the system. You're back into control and you can then pop back into bed and perhaps have a good night's sleep. The other thing that you can use is Tulsi tea. And I recommend that ingredient in tea because it has medically proven bioactive ingredients that also can support an adrenaline surge and mitigate that stress reactivity. So making yourself a nice warm cup of herbal tea, and Tulsi is my preferred one, after you've done the air bashing for 2 minutes, can then allow you to get back into bed and just settle your breath down. And hopefully you'll be asleep in no time because you'll be so exhausted from your air bashing.
That's great advice that I've never heard before. Well, finally, for a woman listening who is struggling with one or all of these symptoms, what's the most important thing you want her to know?
Number one, you're not alone. Number two, it's not all in your head. And number three is to find a practitioner who has a special interest in guiding you through this menopausal change. So source a doctor who you know has a special interest in women's health. And I think the really good thing that's happened in the last few months is that the federal government has put $500 million into women's health, hormonal health, and into training doctors to do that job better than we have in the past. And that's going to be a win-win. But we're a few years ahead of getting that support on the ground for women to activate, this week, for example.
For sure, which is why it's so wonderful to have wonderful people like you talking to us and informing us and giving us great advice.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you.
And of course, you've got a great book coming out that is basically tailor-made for a woman going through the menopausal journey.
Exactly. It's a huge effort on my co-author and my part. So written by Sharon Colker and myself, but it's called Hormonal Harmony. And it basically takes women from puberty all the way through fertility, perimenopause, menopause into what we would like to call the age of wisdom. We don't call it postmenopausal time anymore. And that book's out on the 29th of October.
Fantastic. I love that age of wisdom. That's something we can all look forward to experiencing. That's great.
Exactly. It can be a wonderful place to be.
Absolutely. Dr. Coates, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and reassurance today. Heart palpitations, dizziness and panic attacks can feel overwhelming, but as we've heard, there are real explanations behind them, and there are plenty of strategies and treatments that can make a real difference too. So yes, thank you for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you, Zoe.
And listeners, thank you for joining us as well. If you found today's conversation helpful, please share it with a friend who might be going through the same thing, and don't forget to subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode. And for more great advice on living your best life at midlife, don't forget to pick up a copy of Prevention Magazine. I'm Zoe Mernier. See you next time.